We have a very exciting and diverse panel today, so I know that you want to hear from them. And moderating today's discussion will be our own Jan Nussbaum from the LCS, the Law Career Services Office. Jan is a graduate from GGU Law. Sorry, I'm just a little nervous. I'm really excited. And she's practiced for 16 years, mostly doing in-house counsel work and transactional work. And she lived overseas in London for a number of years and kind of went back and forth between here and London. And now she's back here at our own GGU. And so thank you very much, Jan, for facilitating this panel.
Great, thank you. So welcome. I feel like queen for the day. They got me on this chair. So cool. I'm going to introduce our panel and read their bios. So they've all done many things and practiced for a while. So excuse me if I'm going to actually read these rather than trying to remember everything. So first of all, we've got.
The condensed version.
I will try. I will try. We've condensed it some. First, on my left, we have Ulissa Zulaika, and she goes by Yuli, so I'm going to refer to her as Yuli, is a partner at DLK Law Group. DLK Law is an estate and tax planning firm with an advocacy perspective. Yuli primarily manages the probate and trust administration and probate litigation portion of the practice. Yuli is the lead attorney for international estate planning, addressing cross-border issues, and also helps clients structure their personal and business succession planning. Yuli was born in San Diego, and she got a BA in both Japanese and political science from UC Berkeley, and she got her JD from Golden Gate. She's currently pursuing an LLM in taxation here, and Yuli is a member of the California Bar, the Trust and Estate section of BLSA, the Latino Community Foundation, and she's also on the board of directors for San Francisco La Raza Lawyers and the Bay Area Latino Lawyers Fund. And then next to Yuli, on my left also, is Katuri Kay, and she's an associate at Trucker Huss in San Francisco and focuses her practice on ERISA and compliance assistance for pension and welfare plans. Katuri currently authors the regulatory and legislative update for the Western Pension and Benefits Conference's quarterly newsletter. Prior to joining Trucker Huss, Katuri worked as an associate at large firms in San Francisco and New York, where her practice focused primarily on executive compensation and ERISA. Katuri received her JD from Howard University School of Law and her BA in political science from the University of California at Berkeley. Katuri is a member of the State Bar of California, New York, and she's a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority and membership coordinator for the Black Lawyers of Northern California. Okay, and then to my right is Deb Kinney, and she's a partner at DLK Law Group, and it's estate planning, trust administration, and probate practice with offices in San Francisco and Santa Rosa. The firm represents beneficiaries of estates, provides business formation services, and negotiates and drafts real estate agreements, and represents parties in negotiation for prenuptial contracts. Although DLK Law Group represents a broad spectrum of families, the practice is well suited to especially serve the needs of and complexity faced by the LGBT community in regards to estate planning, asset sharing, and welfare transfer. Deb is a known resource for emerging issues for registered domestic partners, same-sex married couples, and others who have relationship recognition from outside of California. Deb has been involved with the passage of SB 565, making property tax reassessment exemptions retroactive to the date of registration for domestic partners and other tax issues pertaining to federal recognition of community property rights. That was a mouthful. Okay. Deb serves on the board of Horizons Foundation and is vice president of the board of Equity California, a statewide legislative and political organization dedicated to the equality for LGBT community. She's a member of the California State Bar Trust and Estate section of BLSA, bailiff, and other professional organizations. Deb's firm is also now providing services in Spanish. And I also wanted to say that Deb is also got her undergrad degree from UC Berkeley, as did Dan. There's this theme going on, but I did not. I went to the University of Washington, so go Huskies. But my daughter went to Cal. So anyway, and you got your law degree from New College. Yeah. And then last but not least is Dan Johnson, who is a partner at Morgan Lewis. He in the litigation practice and a member Steering Committee. He's a senior trial lawyer and has tried numerous cases in state and federal courts throughout the U.S. and before the International Trade Commission, the American Arbitration Association, and the Judicial Arbitration and Mediation Services. His practice focuses on high-stakes, complex litigation, including patent cases, trade secret cases, disputes over software structure and source code, license disputes, unfair competition, and false advertising disputes. I used to do those too. But I was in-house counsel, so I would hire people like Dan. He was also, which I found of interest, he was Deputy Attorney General for the state of California from 1973 to 1976. I've got his JD from Yale, and he got his undergrad degree from Missouri. So, anyway, welcome to all of you. And, yeah. So, I wanted to ask you first, and I will throw this out to Dan, because he had to wait to have kids. We'll go through the whole group. As a young lawyer, how did you find out what kind of law you wanted to do? How did you end up doing IP litigation?
Well, first of all, you see how they configured the room, the oldest on the right and then the young folks on the left. I assume they figured they'd give us as little time as possible since we obviously have nothing relevant to say. Biggest issue for me was once you become a lawyer, learning how to be a lawyer, and then learning what works for you. That sounds simple, but it's really not. I mean, there are people who are better suited to be corporate lawyers or negotiators or involved in analysis of lots of intricate regulations. And then there are those who really are better suited to be a litigator. Now, what does that mean? I mean, most folks think of being a litigator as you stand up behind the table and you in the shop. The truth of the matter is, it's writing, it's strategic thinking, it's being able to see a playing field and figure out what's going on and maximize the opportunities for your particular client. I happen to be pretty good at it at a very early age, and so I never even thought about doing the other things that were available. So for me, I enjoyed it. Obviously, the key to any of this is doing something that you enjoy, because you're much more likely to be good at it than if you're doing something because it's there. So I always want to be a litigator. How I ended up being an IP litigator? Well, this is a true story, but it shows as much about the practice as anything else. One of my partners came to me one day, because I've been trying typically contract trade secret cases. He came to me one day and said, well, we think the trend in the next 20 years is going to be patent litigation. We don't have any patent litigators. You're not afraid of technology. You're our guy. And I said, I've never seen a patent. He showed me one. I said, I couldn't read the damn thing. He said, we'll teach you everything you need to know. True story. So that says a lot about a variety of things, not the least of which is flexibility. If you want to develop a real practice, is more important than anything else. You can make certain assumptions without much information about what will or won't work, and oftentimes you'll be wrong because you didn't give it a chance. The second thing is trends. When I was a young lawyer, there was all sorts of great litigation dealing with environmental law, dealing with tortious fraud involving insurance companies that don't exist today. People who stake their flag to that particular wagon either had to transform themselves or they got out of the business. So my rule of thumb as a young lawyer, and to this day, is you should assume that every 5 years you're going to be doing something different. And the issue is why? The answer is because the market changes. And you are an animal driven by the market, just like every other business, because you're essentially a business unit. That's how I ended up doing that.
Well, actually, I ended up basically doing law by accident. And the truth is that I went to law school just to have a graduate degree, because I wanted to have another kid, and I knew that in the Bay Area, I was doing sales at the time. If I needed to have a real job, I needed 2 degrees, and law seemed malleable. So while I was just finished law school and hadn't taken the bar yet, a friend of mine had a wrongful eviction case, and he asked if I would handle it. So I found an attorney who said, if you do the work, you can use my bar number. And so I started doing the work with him. He was the lawyer. I was the associate, I was the paralegal at that point. And that very first case went all the way to California State Supreme Court. The issue that it ended up going on was whether plaintiffs' attorneys could have multipliers for contingency fees. So I thought that if we lost that case, my career was over because there was no plaintiff attorney that was going to talk to me again. So I was totally prepared that that was the end of my legal career. Luckily, we won. And then I actually had another kid, and I took some time off, 2 years, and then was ready to go back to work. And at that point, I wasn't going to agree with Darren, but the older side of us, you know, I already had a number of years of experience, and I didn't want to start as a neophyte, and started looking around. And at that point, I was either going to go into affordable housing, or I was going to go into estate planning. And I figured that's where I had enough experience and understanding and credibility, and I didn't have to start at the bottom again. So it was circumstance how I found the firm that I wanted to work with, and the rest is history, as they say. But you know, it is interesting, especially like taking time off to have children and things like that, and then putting the career back together. And someone once told me very early on, if you want to be a mom and have a career, it will not always be the straight line upward trend, and to think more of it as a patchwork quilt. So in essence, this is my third career now, and I'm very happy at what I'm doing at this point.
Victoria?
For me, I always knew I was going to be a lawyer, so it wasn't an issue of how I became a lawyer, just when I was going to become a lawyer. For ERISA, when I started law school almost 10 years ago now, one of the biggest pieces of advice that I got from one of my professors was when you go to your summer associate position, look for a partner who would advocate for you. Look for a partner who's going to fight for you, because that's, regardless of what type of law you're going to do, you need to have somebody who's invested in your professional career. So when I started in New York as a summer associate, I was looking for that partner, finding someone who would just care about my career, who would mentor me, everything else like that. And it was actually an older white male. He'd been practicing since 1974, and he practiced ERISA. I had no idea what ERISA was. I didn't know who she was. I just it was ERISA, and I was going to do ERISA. He was actually in the tax group, but the ERISA group, it was a huge New York law firm, but the ERISA group was very small. So it was him and an up counsel, and I became their first associate. So that summer, I clung on to him. I made him take me lunch every single day. I bothered him every day. He didn't even understand how to have associates because he's been practicing on his own in a huge law firm for so long. So when I went back to law school, he told me to figure out everything, learn about ERISA, and come back that summer and start practicing. So that's how I fell into ERISA. But when I was in New York, I did Title I plan asset investment work, which is completely different from the type of law that I do now. So after a year and a half of doing that, I wanted to come back to California. So the up counsel that I worked with, she actually went to my former firm. So I called her up and I said, I want to go back home. She said, that's great, but now you have to do executive compensation. Once again, something I didn't know anything about, but I wanted to come back to California. So I said, that's fine, I'll do executive compensation. So that's how I got into that, but I continued doing ERISA. In California, it's different, so now I do the employee benefits and ERISA side. So I did that exclusively for 4 years, representing executives and doing ERISA employee benefits. And finally, last year, I decided I just wanted to focus specifically on ERISA employee benefits, and I jumped to where I work now, which is an ERISA boutique that strictly does ERISA and employee benefits. But it's just, for me, it was finding people, and along the way, I've had great mentors. My groups have always been so small because of the type of work that ERISA is, so I've always had direct partner contact, and I had direct contact with people who had a vested interest in my career. So that's how I shaped my career.
I have to agree. I think that it's important to find a mentor, so I'm just going to piggyback on that comment. But how I ended up, I think I've always been interested more in politics. So when I was in high school, I worked with congressmen. I got internships. I went to D.C. I was really involved in legislation, you know, going out and voting and hanging flyers and being involved. And then when I went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, I went that route. You know, I did political science. Law was always in the back of my mind, but I wasn't sure that I wanted to be an attorney. It was just something that was an option that many politicians, you know, at some point, you know, go to law school and then they become politicians. While I was in college, I got an internship for 3 years for now State Senator Mark Leno And what I did for their district office at that time, when he was an assemblyman, was pretty much what most people don't like to do, which is read the budget, break it down for everyone, read the new law, what does it mean, write letters to constituencies, and at the same time, that was, what I call the nerdy aspect of it, and then the other part was being a liaison with the community, and having different events and explaining the laws and options. And then when I was there, I realized obviously that I do have a passion for the law, that law school might be an option for me, so I decided to look into getting a job in a legal, just any law office to see if it was really for me or not. And I actually started working with Deb about 7 years ago. I decided I'm going to take a year off before applying to law school, make sure I want to invest all that money in time before I do that. And when I actually went to interview, I had no idea what estate planning was. I couldn't even, but I ended up really enjoying learning about the tax. It was a big learning curve, but I think I just jumped right in and, started digging and learning as much as I could, and I really enjoyed it. And the way, for me, I love the tax code. It's all over the place, just like my brain is, so it made me feel right at home. And I decided law school was the way to go, and I worked during my law career, so I did the night program here at GGU, which is great because not a lot of schools offer it, and people have a lot of family, or they have to work, or whatever it is. So I think it's a great opportunity for people like me that need to work, have a family, and want to also go to school. So.
Well, my next question was going to be about whether you had a mentor and a coach, and I'm going to add a little bit to it and start with Dan over here, because even though Katuri's talked about the mentor, I'm going to spin it a little bit and bring up this idea of a coach. Wilma Wallace, I know, is speaking. She's with the Gap. She's in House at the Gap, and she's speaking, I think, in the last session. But I actually heard her speak about a year ago at a women in diversity, women and minority discussion. And there was this whole idea about a coach, which is different than a mentor. A mentor is really somebody who, as Katuri said, this man sort of, liked her and gave her guidance and told her these are, here are certain things that, you need to do. And I guess I'm speaking for you, but you can talk about more. But a coach is really somebody who maybe doesn't even work directly with you, isn't even doing the kind of law you're doing, maybe works in a completely different part of the firm or the company, but you develop a relationship with, and they really bring you along. When there's meetings and people are discussing who we're going to give this project to or this litigation case to, they sort of speak up and really advocate for you. And it's something that apparently, when I went to this talk, they told about, that traditional white men do. But women and minorities often have not had these coaches. And so that trend is changing. And to be able to have somebody who's a coach is a really valuable thing, because they kind of look out for you and make sure that you do get certain projects, and there is somebody that talks about you and advocates for you. So my next question is sort of to ask Dan, Deb, Katuri, and Yuli whether, what mentors you had and coaches that helped you in your career.
Well, you and I are about to part ways. I have heard of the myth of the coach and the mentor. Most of the folks that I knew when I was an associate always talked about somebody else having one. And it has been my experience that two things are true. One, if you do really good work, people figure it out and they use you. If you don't advocate for yourself, it's highly unlikely that anybody else will. So I always start with the assumption, if you think there's this someone out there who's going to provide you with the path and the keys to the yellow brick road and going to the kingdom, you're in the wrong business. I was the first black lawyer at Cooley Valley. I was the 32nd lawyer. And they had very interesting ideas about what it is they thought I could do and what I couldn't do. And I had very different ideas about what I could do and couldn't do. And I quickly figured out that there would always be a collision between somebody else's expectations and my reality. Which means, and I said this earlier, you are your own business unit. So it is on you to figure out, A, what skill sets you need. Because all associates are basically in the same pool. They gotta learn how to write, they gotta learn how to research, they have to learn how to make presentations. And it doesn't, that's without regard to, you know, your genetic, racial, or whatever you make. And that tends to get lost sometimes when people say, oh, my coach is gonna help me. You're your coach, number one. Number two, remember, I was at the AG's office, and I did have a mentor. When I got into private practice, you know, as I tell people, in those days, nobody's going to give you a six-figure income just because you got a good smile. It doesn't work that way. You really have to figure out the skill set that will enable you to be effective. So, I would say there are people out there who become allies, usually because you're working with them and they become to rely upon you, and those people become, if you want to call them a mentor. The truth of the matter is it's a relationship built on out of necessity. They need you to do the work and you need them to give it to them. And the other piece is that I do believe that there are coaches out there. I, for one, will often go to folks who I think are either in trouble or don't understand the ropes, and I'll say, you and I are going to have a conversation. It's off the record. You can either be offended by this, or you can take it for what it's worth, and I'll have a blunt conversation. And when I say blunt, it's a blunt conversation, and I will tell them, this is what you're doing right, this is what you're doing wrong. And I won't sugarcoat it because this is business. And, you know, hearts and flowers, not happening. And if you disagree, go back and look at the recorder and look at how much money the average lawyer in a big law firm gets paid. And then you say to yourself, how many of those are there for heart, because they do the hearts and flowers thing. My point is, while it's absolutely true people can help you and will help you, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that if you're not helping yourself, forget it.
It's very good perspective. Not everyone has a coach and a mentor.
No, and the truth of the matter is, I actually did not have a coach or a mentor. But what happened is I had a pattern of successes. And so the usual excuses about you can't write, you're not articulate, blah, 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 they couldn't make those arguments. Other arguments would be made, but they were harder to make stick. And so what I realized is, you know what, as much as you want to feel as if you you're part of this great group and these people are going to push you along, it's competition. If someone said you're running the NBA and you wanted to play guard, and you say, yeah, there are 4 of the guys and there's only 1 slot. You guys could all be best friends, but that's where it begins and ends. It's all competition. Now, that's my perspective, and some people say that I'm either uber aggressive or feeling, you can form your own opinion. But that's what I would leave you with and say, if you can find people who help you, great. But if you don't help yourself, you look in the mirror and you say, who am I going to blame for this?
I have a slightly different.
Five lawyers, and everybody has their own opinion, which is good. It's good because you're all going to see different things.
You know, I chose the oldest public interest law school in the country to go to law school because I knew I was never going downtown or working for a large firm. It just had no interest in me. Mostly because I don't think I could have kept up that kind of energy all the time. And you know, whether it's a gender thing or whatever, but the hearts and the flowers part actually I think it's attracted to me in the practice of law. And one of the things that I've really had to do is find out how do you bring the human experience into the practice of law, or it would have no interest to me. And having said that, I basically have started my own firm and grown it, and we do what we do well. We're in a niche market. And when it comes to the question of a mentor or a coach, it's interesting because I got into this particular niche, and it's not all we do, but it's what we're known for and what we're really good at is the LGBT estate planning complex issues. And we got into this about 10 years ago, right before all the laws started changing. And it has been a roller coaster ride since. I mean, we just looked at a new code provision this morning that we use for all our clients, but guess what? Can't use it for the LGBT clients. And you know, I thought I had thought of most of the ones that we can't use, and this one caught me by surprise again. So the question is, for us, or for me, the coaching has been on the technical side because there are no patent lawyers. I mean, there's no equivalent lawyers to go to. There's no one with more experience than we have at this point, which means that half the time we're making up the law. Seriously. And when I find things that are affecting humans on a daily basis, that's how I got involved with Equality California. I run up to Sacramento and I get a bill passed to patch that little place that we forgot about and things like that. But the coaching that has come, amazingly enough, has come from my colleagues. So there's a think tank that we formed in 2003 or 4, because all of a sudden we had to learn community property and how it applies to people under state law when you don't have federal recognition. And as one of my colleagues said, he said, I thought I'd lived long enough that I'd never have to learn this. But in fact, as we were getting more rights and the law was changing, we came together and coached each other. And we've had this ongoing think tank since that year. We only meet quarterly now. At one point, we were meeting every other month because there was so much happening that we didn't even know how to translate it into the practice of law. And so the group was formed with estate planning attorneys, family attorneys, and tax specialists. And we have been rolling up our sleeves and coaching each other. And we still have our own private listserv. We still can go to each other. It's a place where we can say, I need help. And we rely upon each other because we're all keep venturing into places that there's nothing in the CEB guide. You know, there's no class where you're going to learn what we do. In fact, we take interns from Golden Gate University, and somehow we were lucky enough to get hooked up with Sharon this semester, and she was trying to decide whether to take a 4th class on contemporary issues in international tax planning. And I said to her if she was willing to do a couple extra units for our firm, I would make sure she learned a heck of a lot more than she could potentially learn in a class. And I told her I'd call it contemporary issues in LGBT tax planning. and we literally are creating that area of thought around it and are pushing the envelope where we can. And we'll talk more about the advocacy in our practice in a few minutes. But the coaching has been collective.
What's interesting is the perspective. One is a big firm, one is a small firm. And if you look at that from that prism, 2 things come to mind. One is what resources are available to you. In a big firm, you have not unlimited resources. You can get information or gain access to information by picking up the telephone. In a small firm, it's a very different process. Again, I'm not sure if that makes them mentors, colleagues, or what, but he is, in fact, a difference in the market segment in which you are.
That's true, and hands down, he makes more money than you do.
Poor black guy.
Do you have more of the heart? What would you call it? The hearts and the...
He called it the hearts and flowers. I kind of like that.
Well, I guess for me, I worked at the big firm. I worked at 2 huge firms. The first firm I worked at was the Owners Law Nation, international global firm. The second firm I worked at was like the #1 firm in California. They might say otherwise. And international firm as well.
Everybody's number 1.
Exactly. And then I went to a boutique. I work for a boutique firm now. It's 27 attorneys. I think about 12 of them or so are partners. The rest are associates. So I have both perspectives. I agree with Dan to the extent that you have to advocate for yourself. And Crystal knows. When I talk to law students, you have to cheerlead for yourself. You have to be able to. Your work has to first of all sell you. At the end of the day, no one's going to invest in you if you don't do good work, if you don't try, if you don't do the research, if you don't understand, especially the type of law that we do. It's a really steep learning curve, and it's something that 2 years into it, you really don't know what's going on, but you have to still try to figure things out, and people get weeded out through the process. So you have to understand the work. No one's really available to invest in you if you aren't learning something, if you aren't doing something. I agree with to the extent that you have to advocate for yourself, your work, I'm the #1 cheerleader for myself. I get involved with so many different things and so many different organizations, and I let the firms know, big firm, small firm, I let them know that I am an asset to the firm. I'm not just another associate. I am someone who's bringing something to the table. So I agree with that, but also I agree that we do have some degrees of mentors along the process for me, and I don't think it's a necessarily a relationship of necessity, because my mentor from my New York firm, I haven't worked in his firm since 2007, him and the council, but I've called them along the way the past 6 years about everything, about my career, about going to different firms, and they reach out to me as well. When I thought I was going to go in-house, there are people that I talked to, and they even spoke to a couple of people and said, she needs to come in-house for you. When I wanted to leave the firm, and then I decided, no, I just wanted to go to a boutique. So I believe that there are people who, regardless of them not being able to get something back from you, they do invest in your relationship, your career, your professional future, and it depends, I think, it starts with your work. I think because of the fact that I did good work, and because of the fact that I was open to learning, and I cared about the work that I did, and they saw the passion, or whatever the case may be, they took the time to take extra work and to invest in me. It's funny that you said Wilma Wallace, because she's one of my informal coaches. Wilma's someone that I call, like when I wanted to go to Google in-house, she's someone I had conversations with back and forth a lot about going in-house, about the process, about Black women being in-house and everything else like that. So I do believe that there are coaches along the way. Wilma's another person that she doesn't get anything from me, she doesn't gain anything from me. There's no work going back and forth with that flow, but she does care about the fact that she wants to make sure that my career is going smoothly. So I think big firm, small firm, you can find people along the way who actually have a vested interest in your career for whatever reason it may be. And I've been in the middle where I've been at a big firm and there was no one at the firm I could talk to. There was no one at the firm, other than the fact that I did good work and they loved that, but there wasn't a mentor-mentee relationship, and I was there for 4 years. And I was talking to New York and asking them questions and everything else like that, but I was at a firm where the partners liked the work I did, but they weren't taking the extra time. So I think it's critical to have those relationships because they give advice outside of what you can see even in your firm.
Yeah, I think that throughout your career, you'll develop certain relationships that I think will serve as your coaches or mentors or what you want to call it. You know, there's attorneys and non-attorneys that you call and have you done this? Can you help me with this? And that happens all the time, every day. You know, I'm going to embarrass Deb a little bit, but we have an in-house secret, and she's my daytime wife. So she was, we worked together for a while now, so she was my mentor. And then, you know, like I said, we've developed along the way colleagues or people that you just create relationships with that it's not one of necessity, but I mean, to be honest, you do use each other, but that's okay because you're helping each other out. I think you definitely have to take initiative, show good work, not necessarily with your mentors, but in working with other attorneys, at least for me, and we might get into this later, but as a woman, as a Latina, being young, I know that I have to work 10 times harder sometimes to prove that I do good work. That just because you've been doing this for 30 years doesn't mean you know more than me. So sometimes you have to work harder because they assume certain things about you. With that said, that's where I think you have to take the initiative, find the relationships, get experience. I think that's all crucial. Finding a mentor or a coach, if you can do so, is great. You know, I have colleagues that work in big firms where they don't know the people that are 2 stories above them. Totally different than, you know, we have 2 offices, 5 attorneys, support staff. So that's, you know, huge difference in the environment and what your experience will be. But if you can find someone that's a great resource for you, do so, and get as much experience as you can and always have that initiative.
We've also talked about opportunities that you took advantage of, which was really nice to hear. When something came up, you sort of embraced it. I'd like to talk about if there are hurdles that you had to face in terms of advancing your career. And it could be in terms of your particular practice area or in becoming a partner, or what have you. And maybe I'll start with you this time, go the other way.
I think I just kind of mentioned one of the hurdles, and this happens, I mean, often when you're dealing sometimes with new attorneys, especially in our field, estate planning, tax planning. Most of when I go to seminars for attorneys that I on opposite sides, most of the people are older white men. there are women, very few people of color that I see. I don't know why. I think there's a huge need in our communities, you know, for estate planners and tax planners, but that's just, you know, part of our field, I guess. The hurdles, I really do feel that sometimes I have to work 2 times as hard to prove myself, which, you know, may not be the case for someone else. And about becoming partner, you know, we kind of had a deal that as soon as I passed the bar, I was going to become partner, so I had that one easy. And I know I got lucky on that end, but I worked hard for it, so, so yeah.
I think my experience was slightly different because, like I said, I've come from small practice groups. So when it's a partner and you and a counsel, it's not a matter of proving yourself. It's just getting the work done. I didn't have someone else to compare me to. He was just someone that believed in me to get the work done. When I went to Ori, my group was 7 people, and I was the youngest attorney, but I went to get 4 partners, 3 associates. So it wasn't a matter of people didn't take you seriously or you don't do good work. It's just you need to get this work done. They took the time to teach you whatever the case may be because we had a lot of work. We were only 7 people. So my experience is slightly different because I never had to worry about proving myself or I'm not good enough or people didn't take me seriously because I had, like I said, I had direct partner contact, I had direct client contact, and I've always had a lot of responsibility from the beginning. It wasn't a case where I had to prove myself in order to get responsibility. I went into situations with responsibility. So I think my biggest hurdle is just being a parent and balancing that with my career because I was a parent through law school, as an attorney even today. So I think it's just people taking your time commitment seriously, especially if you're trying to balance, she has a play or this, that, and the other, and a deal is closing or something's happening or an executive needs to get his agreement amended by this time tonight or this time in the morning. I think that's, for me, it's just respecting time. And I think as you get older in the practice, when people realize that you can get the work done, and they don't micromanage as much as when I started when I was the first year or second year, where every second of the day I had to be around the partner because we had to figure this out or figure this out. I think now that I'm 6 years removed, they know that Katori's going to get the work done, and if she has to leave, if she has to go pick her daughter from school, there's no question. So I think that was my biggest hurdle, to get that respect and show that I still was committed to doing the job and being a full-time associate. I wasn't going to go half-time. I wasn't going to be a career associate. I was going to be a partner track like everyone else and still be a mother.
And in your field, there's not many women or minorities?
Yeah.
So did you feel you had to even prove yourself more, or you got the work done, you did such a great job, it was no question?
I guess it's, like I said, my experience is a little bit different because of the fact that I've always come in with a lot of responsibility. So I've never looked at it as, oh, I'm a black woman, people aren't going to take me seriously, whatever the case may be. If an executive calls, a CEO, whoever calls, and he needs an agreement done, he's going to talk to me. He's not going to say, oh, do you have someone else that I can go through? No, because already I need this done. This has to happen today to get this done. So I never felt that I was working harder than anyone else. Everyone in my group worked hard. Everyone in my group worked overtime. Everyone in my group billed so many hours a year. So it wasn't like I had to work more or less harder. I felt like it was just, honestly, I was the same. Because of the fact, like I said, I think my experience is completely different from my friends who graduated my same class who went to larger groups. I think the group has a lot to do with it because I didn't have an associate who I had to feed my work to before I got to a partner. So that associate was sitting there and looking at everything I was doing. I had direct partner contact. So the work that I did, the partner said we went directly to a client. So I just had that direct interaction, which changes things when you have to go through an associate.
So Deb?
To piggyback on what both of you have said, and then also to add that, you know, it's time and knowledge. There's just so much changing all the time in the field of law. Being able to do the work and stay up with all of the legal changes, the tax changes, it just seems to never end. And I did employment discrimination for the first 4 years, and it was phenomenal. It was a point in time where so many cases were coming down, law was changing so rapidly. And I still find that that's a challenge. And I think that challenge is being exponentially exacerbated a little bit by the use of the internet. I mean, I'll get 250 emails a day that people think that I'm going to respond to, on top of meeting clients, on top of being a parent, on top of running a law practice, on top of my political work, my extracurricular work. And you know, I mean, we have this thing that we started saying during 2008, during Prop 8, and I still believe it's to sleep is for babies, tiny, tiny babies, not grown gay people. And so that's an ongoing challenge. And the other thing that I find is a hurdle is, and it's kind of a two-edged sword, is being really good at what we do for a minority group, and in reverse, not getting pigeonholed as only being able to serve that minority group. And so it's kind of an interesting balance that we've been dealing with over the years, and it seems to actually be lessening now. But to be perceived as a lawyer in the LGBT community, which is a very small community, right? What are we, 3, 5, maybe 10% of the population, just because we're in San Francisco. And in all honesty, the work that we do for our same-sex clients is so much more difficult than what we do for a heterosexual married couple, that is a really easy piece of work to do. But it's kind of interesting when you push out your expertise, what people start thinking about, and the translation into the rest of the broad spectrum. So I don't know, it's just something that we've been kind of working with over the years, and you know, as the firm matures, as we have more attorneys, as we get involved in more cases, as people bring their straight parents in, as you know, I mean, it's starting to change, but it's been a little odd.
Okay, I come from a different world. So I'll give you 2 examples. One is an associate, the other is a partner, because the worlds are very different. So you are an associate. One of the issues that you will immediately confront is, what's the stereotype for your particular group? If you are 6'5" and you got a big bass voice, whether it's the 70s, 80s, 90s, you know the stereotype. You're a ball. You can play ball, but can you do anything else? Are you articulate? If you are Asian, I don't care if it's male or female, you are quiet, you are serious, you work very hard, and you got no personality. Fill in the blanks as you go along, and you will all arrive at the same conclusion. There are stereotypes that affect you whether you like it or not, A. And then B, how do you address the stereotypes? Do you fight the stereotype? Do you try to get out of, do you say to yourself, I'm going to be me, whatever that me is? Or do you do what I try to do, which is to use the stereotype to my advantage? That is to say, I don't care when I walk in a room and somebody sees a basketball player, I know what I can do. That requires you to think very carefully, however, about, you know, are you in a position where you can demonstrate your skill set? That is to say, as an associate, everybody thinks, oh, the other guy's got it better, the other guy's got the mentor, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is everybody's worried about the same thing. Do I write effectively? Am I able to convincingly convey my points in a very succinct fashion? Am I efficient? Am I taking too much time to bill? Well, you're all in that same boat. But everybody's thinking the other guy doesn't have the problem and I do. And then you throw the stereotype on top of that, and it can be overwhelming. So the first thing you have to do is be honest. Recognize there are stereotypes, A, and B, that they're not going to go away magically no matter how many laws you pass. And then you figure out, look, I'm either going to address it one way or the other. Now, one way you address it, you capitulate and say, well, that's what they expect of me, or you say, what do I expect of myself? So I've seen lots and lots of associates, mentored lots and lots of associates, and it didn't matter if they were black, Asian, Jewish, gay, lesbian. They were all looking at that stereotype, whatever one that fit their particular bag, and they were having to confront, how do I address it? Okay, so I'm just telling you, don't assume the stereotypes don't exist. They do. How you respond will be the difference between success and failure. If you go in with an attitude, you're going to end up walking out the door with that same attitude. Now, as a partner, what's the difference? Well, now you're in the business world. You're in the real, you're dealing with clients and you're managing clients, and you have to manage their expectations. We also have to manage their stereotypes too. So you have to figure out ways to make it clear that not only do you know what you're doing, but you really are better at it. I don't get into this, I work 10 times harder. My view of the world is, this shit is hard. Everybody works hard. If you want to be a lawyer, you got a calendar and you got a clock. I can guarantee you, you will control neither. No matter how you slice it, no matter what you do, you will never control the calendar or clock if you're going to be in full-time practice. For those of you who say, oh yes, we can do it, then yeah, right. So as a consequence, you have to learn how to manage yourself as a professional. And that is not easy, primarily because most of us come from backgrounds where our parents didn't do this. So we don't have anybody to look to. So everything is kind of new. And that's a real burden. It's a real burden because one of my best friends is a guy who got an MBA. He went to Stanford undergrad, has an MBA. And our biggest joke is, wouldn't it be nice to sit around a family table with our brothers and sisters and talk about our issues? And we both laugh because we have very talented brothers and sisters. None of them do what we do, or even close. And not having the ability to have those kinds of conversations is actually a very big deal, because you feel alone so much more of the time. So some folks have talked about having relationships with friends and call them mentors. I characterize it differently. You develop friendships, and those friendships will be with a variety of people, and that enables you, if you draw upon those friendships, to find what's typically lacking. And what's typically lacking is, you've never been here before. I mean, I vividly remember the first partner retreat. It was at the Claremont in Oakland, and they had one black member, and I walked in, and I'm a goofy little third-year lawyer, and there's the two black guys. They're cleaning up the men's area, and they were also shining the shoes, right? It's because he says, brother, man, you're the first black dude we have ever seen. Can I please shine your shoes? And I thought, oh, this is interesting. But I'm telling you that, I tell you that, first of all, because it's a poignant reminder that there really is a 99% and a 1%, and there really are different expectations. But also, think about the conflict, the internal conflict, because that could have been one of my buddies, or somebody that I used to run with when I was in high school. And yet I'm in a completely different space, and I don't know how to deal with being in that space. Those are real obstacles. Those are real hurdles, and those all have to be addressed. And I don't care if it's in a small firm, when you walk into a court, or a large firm, right? You typically are coming from a community that's very different than the one in which you find yourself. And accepting that as a reality, and saying, rather than saying I'm going to fight it, but rather, how can I navigate my way through this? Right? Because I know you guys look at me now, you say, hey, the guy's got on a fancy suit, she just said he makes money. I grew up in Vallejo. None of my folks went to college. My father was a successful businessman. He had a janitor business, which meant I was a janitor. And he had, slated to be a janitor. It didn't happen. But it didn't happen for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is I figured out you are multicultural. You come from different communities. And you got to adjust to your professional community, and you can do whatever you want in your personal. So, is that a hurdle? Depends on your point of view. It is, however, yeah.
How much time do we have? We've got 10 minutes? So I'm thinking, should we open it up for questions and answers?
To Debbie, you mentioned you have multiple careers. Someone like myself, I've been in business, MBA, moving towards kind of the law aspect. So can you talk about how maybe your prior experience kind of helped in what you're doing now kind of along the way?
Yeah, no, that's actually a good question. And that I kind of alluded to when I said, when I decided that I needed to come back after having another child. I didn't want to start as a neophyte. I wasn't ready to start as an associate at a base pay level and work my way up again. I'd already paid my dues, but in other professions. And so I actually gave quite a bit of thought as to how I could leverage my past experience with my desires to get back into some area of law. The other thing is what you were talking about is relationships. I brought a lot of relationships with me, and I've had those. I grew up in Oakland, so I have people that I've known since kindergarten and on, and having those kinds of fabrics and everything else, I think was really helpful. The other thing too is that my previous professions have been very entrepreneurial, and that's just. My father also started his own business. We were kind of in an entrepreneurial family, if you will. And so that was in my blood early. I don't know where that comes from, nurture or nature, but it was my experience. And so that was helpful in trying to decide that I could actually start my own firm. And I wasn't necessarily, I didn't necessarily have to go downtown to get the experience and the credibility that I knew that I hadn't earned it. I had earned it wherever, and I had a lot of learning to do. But I could also do it in the context of hanging out on the show.
Okay. So I kind of want to go back to something that Dan said in the very beginning. And clearly in this market, a lot of us are struggling to find jobs or internships, and we're trying to figure out how can we get into, the next firm or the next thing. And Dan, you talked about finding the trends. So I wanted to kind of figure out, would you say the markets that you're in, the practice areas are trending right now, and they're areas where, young attorneys can find a home and grow? Or if not, what areas would you suggest as fields of practice for us?
That's a very, very difficult question because it really is a function of your age. That is to say, law firms are really uneven at the moment in terms of intake. You know the game about where you went to school and how well you did. But one of the things that I think is fascinating now, it certainly didn't exist when I was young, is that the internet and social networking has opened up some very interesting possibilities. Now, obviously, you can start to develop a reputation and you're able to promote it in a very different way than, say, the traditional way. It's not clear to me that the basic law, the basic areas of law have really changed that much. I mean, you're still talking about interpersonal relationships, whether it be doing estate planning or products liability or criminal. And the key to all of it is to follow up on the point about being an entrepreneur. If you wait for somebody to come to you, you are likely to be waiting. I mean, you have to be your own advocate, you have to be your own business person. And it is really imperative that you operate in that mode. You should assume you might get turned down 50 times before you get what you want. And I use me as an example. When I was a third year associate at Yale, I didn't have a job. The law firms told me that I had a big afro, that I wasn't going to be comfortable in their environment. So I literally flew myself to California, walked from door to door, and literally walked in unannounced to the Attorney General's office and handed him my resume and said, I'd like to talk to somebody. That somebody turned out to be Wiley Manuel, who was Associate Justice of California Supreme Court. I walk into Wiley's office, he takes a look at my resume, he says, wow, you want to work for us? You got a job. Now, had I not taken that and shown that initiative, who knows how things might have worked out. My point to you is that it's never easy, but it's doable. And if you accept that notion, that it's never easy, but it's doable, you have a much better shot at being successful. If you, and I use Clarence Thomas as anything. Clarence Thomas was a year behind me in law school. Clarence was very bitter that he didn't get any offers for any of the law firms. He thought he should. And my attitude was, I had a couple opportunities of nothing substantial. My attitude was, look, I got to do what I need to do to make it. His attitude was to get mad and stay mad. Now, does that answer the question about what markets are? I can't answer that, because that really does change. The law changes all the time. And access points are so important, but most access points are actually driven by your initiative. Now, if you're inside a law firm, it's another matter. We can talk about that, but that, I hope that at least addresses some of these.
Yeah, and I think we all may have a comment on that. And I think that, we all mentioned it at some point earlier. Initiative is really crucial. When I worked at the firm that I'm at now for a while, but I literally went to court and just sat in hearings. I literally went on site, downloaded a bunch of documents that I had, motions and this and that, and had no idea what they were, and just learned. Because you read the law, and law school gives you a great foundation, but it doesn't teach you anything necessarily about practicing law in real life. So I have to stress the importance about getting the internship, do it for units, in the summer. Take advantage of that. Find a mentor if you don't. Take the initiative. Get a job, and even if you may not get paid a lot because you're an attorney while you're in law school, just part-time. Building those relationships and getting that experience is crucial. When you finish law school, you'll have a great foundation. You'll know how to write a paper. You'll know how to maybe do some legal research. But again, practicing law is somewhat of a different story, and I think it's crucial to have the initiative and try to get some experience.
And I think we all have the luxury that we practice in highly regulated areas. So for me with ERISA, the statute's been around since 1974, but we have the IRS and the DOL, and even now with health and welfare, the HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, that highly regulate the area of law that I do. Rules come out every other day, especially now with the healthcare reform, and even on the qualified plan side, disclosures are numerous rules and disclosures. So for me, when I was at ORIC, what I did was when 409 Cap A came out, which is just this new law that regulates non-qualified compensation to executives, I became the expert, and I took the initiative. No one told me, so you have to go figure out which 409 Cap A is, but I took the initiative to read the rules, to read the regs, to read everything that was coming out with notices and everything, and have a skill set that people have to go to me. And what we do now, you have to take the initiative because there's so many laws, there's so many rules, you can't expect partners to know everything about everything. And you want to be the go-to person. You want to write if a caller comes out, or you can write for a different treaties or a certain organization, or you want to speak. You want to make sure that you take the initiative about your career. You don't have to go into something, a new training topic or whatever, but everything that we do is so highly regulated that you can become the expert in some aspect of a role or whatever the case may be.
We'll take one more question. For a part-time, I'm a prospective, but for someone, I'm interested in going into health law, and I'm going to apply for part-time. So say if I want to work for a firm, and that's my ultimate goal after 4 years, how does a law firm look at a part-time student and evaluating, and hiring that person as far as their overall evaluation, as far as grades, type of law school, work experience, previous work experience? How do they evaluate to make a decision on if that's going to be a great candidate? Because I'm not like, I heard briefly your story, but I'm not like that where I have to work in the daytime. I work in healthcare. I'm very fortunate to work, in some aspect of regulatory and compliance. So I get that exposure. But how is that weighed versus someone who's full-time, with internships?
I was going to say, Renee Washington, she's not here now, but she's actually a student here. She works at our firm. She's a part-time student. She worked in the healthcare field. She does a lot of healthcare work as well. She does a lot of that work, and we love her. She's amazing. She's really smart. She came from that world beforehand because I think she worked for Aetna or someone else, the case may be. But I think if you have the grades, I don't think we necessarily, and especially as a boutique, I don't know from the recruiting side of big firm how they do it. Essentially, we're a boutique, and she specialized in that before she even came to law school. We don't see her any differently from our Cal summer associate who's it's the same. And I think she's someone that you should definitely reach out and talk to and ask her about her experience because she's here at this school.
And if I can comment, I did the night program here at GGU, and I had to work, and I had a kid while I was in law school, and, you know, had a family, have life, you know, other than law school. And I think that's, depending on where you apply, I think, you know, that may vary, but it's also about kind of selling yourself. And, you know, look, I was able to work for time, have a life, and look at my grades. So to me, that can be, if you make it, you know, it's a big plus, because it shows that you're hardworking, that you're smart, and, you know, you saw it through for 4 years. It's not easy. So I think you can use it to your advantage.
I don't know if this directly responds, but it has been my experience that if you are already in the industry, the greatest opportunity to get a job post-law school is by developing relationships in the industry. So that you have people who you know, you can they will rely on you, and you will have a built-in vehicle which will enable you to have access to jobs that others might not. And then if you, again, you show the initiative, you develop the relationships before, during, and after, you're a much better shot at getting employed. It's less about grades and more about contacts.
Thank you.
So I want to thank our panelists. I think they've given us a lot of great information, and I appreciate how candid they were and open, and